outlets to devote resources to the story, what led congressional committees to launch inquiries, what spurred loyal aides to expose the president's deceits, what compelled the Supreme Court to order Nixon to release the Oval Office tapes that incriminated him, and what finally convinced Republicans in Congress to draw up articles of impeachment, a moral consensus emerged that truth and justice transcended partisanship. Our civic and political institutions upheld this standard. The story of Watergate, then, wasn't ultimately about one man's debased behavior. It was about a nation's shared idealism. The scandal led to a raft of reforms intended to curb abuses of power and limit the influence of wealthy individuals, corporations, and lobbyists in public life. These measures have long enjoyed broad public support. By 2016, nearly all had been overturned in court or allowed to lapse. The origins of Watergate reside in a simple burglary. 5 men were arrested in the middle of the night for trying to bug the offices of the Democratic National Committee. When reporters learned of the arrests, they asked 2 questions: who had hired the burglars and why? The dogged pursuit of these questions led to the exposure of a criminal espionage operation run out of the Oval Office. In the early months of the 2016 campaign, burglars again broke into the DNC headquarters. They, too, were looking for dirt that would help elect the Republican candidate. This time, the burglars were Russian hackers, and journalists were oddly unconcerned with who had hired them or why. Instead, they eagerly publicized every scrap of damning material made available to them. These efforts were compounded by a slew of lurid and slanderous stories disseminated by Russian operatives and bots. The result was a potent smear campaign against the Democratic candidate, one engineered by the Kremlin, applauded and perhaps abetted by her Republican opponent, and carried out in large measure by our free press. The burglary in this case led not to the resignation of a sitting president, but the election of a man widely regarded as ethically and mentally unfit for office, even by many of those who voted for him. This book originally carried a different and rather more grandiose subtitle, Toward a Unified Theory of How It All Came Apart. I ultimately chose a simpler phrase, one that captures something of the bewilderment and exasperation so many Americans feel. But I mentioned that first subtitle to emphasize the nature of my undertaking. I'm not offering a single theory or even a set of theories as to how our democracy fell apart. I'm working toward a synthesis of theories. The ascension of Donald Trump to the presidency is certainly the impetus for this investigation, but it should not be mistaken for my subject. In fact, I've been tracking the odd and lurching course of our democracy for most of my adult life. I've pursued this interest not as an academic, an historian, or a political scientist, but as a reporter and more recently, a fiction writer. That makes me a storyteller, technically, though I feel more often like a woozy and puzzled student of the American story. I've placed my faith in stories because I believe them to be the basic unit of human consciousness. The stories we tell and the ones we absorb are what allow us to pluck meaning from the rush of experience. Only through the patient interrogation of these stories can we begin to understand where we are and how we got here. In his elegant 2014 book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, the Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari insists that our species came to dominate the world because we learned to cooperate flexibly in large numbers. This capacity, he contends, stems from our unique cognitive ability to believe in the imagined, to tell stories that extend our bonds beyond clan loyalties. Our larger systems of cooperation, whether spiritual, political, legal, or financial, require faith in a beautiful fiction known as the common good, the sort of mutual trust expressed in any trade agreement or currency. For most of our history, humans relied upon folklore and religious parable to conceptualize a common good. But much of our progress as a species, Harari insists, is a function of culture shifting from superstitious stories to verifiable ones, as happened during the scientific revolution of the 16th century.